before we go to the slide, maybe can you start with a little bit of an introduction to at least some of the key points that you made in that paper talking about decarbonization.
Sure.
What does it mean for the chemical industry in terms of demand for electricity and things like that?
So this paper was a request to write a paper about chemical industry electrification, and one of the figures in the paper that you were interested about shows how, as we move towards the future, our consumption of electricity, in this case clean electricity, is going to jump up by a significant factor. This was based on an assumption we made. So it is no more than an assumption, and the assumption is that in the future we'll be asked to rely on carbon dioxide as our main source of carbon. But it isn't just carbon dioxide, of course, right? You also need hydrogen. So our products need carbon and hydrogen for the most part. And so you also need to extract that hydrogen from somewhere. And that somewhere is water. You could say it's hydrogen, but in reality, if you're moving towards a future where we're using green hydrogen, then the reality is you're really extracting that hydrogen from water. So those are your starting points, carbon dioxide and water. And with that in mind, that's how we made that prediction that in the future we're going to be using a lot more energy than we use today.
Yeah, I mean, the other key assumption, or this is not an assumption, this is a fact, is that today the way the chemical industry operates is it uses the most energetically favored pathway. And if we want to decarbonize, we have to take pathways that are much more energy intensive. And that's the primary driver for this big jump in.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So it isn't so much the path as it is the starting point.
Okay.
So for a very long time, we've been relying on fossil fuels. And fossil fuels bring two components. One is carbon, the other one is hydrogen, and the other one is energy. And they are all key to what we do. And for a long time, we've been using a lot more energy from those hydrocarbons that we've been using carbon and hydrogen. So the net result is that we're burning a lot of those fossil fuels, so we have enough energy to make our products. And now we're being told, first of all, you shouldn't be burning fossil fuels. So the energy disappears, right? And then they say, well, in addition to that, why don't you just stop using fossil fuels? Why don't you just shift to another source for your carbon and for your hydrogen? So it's the fact that now you're going to have to rely on something other than fossil fuels for your energy needs. And on top of that, you're going to have to find your carbon and your hydrogen somewhere else. And it's the combination of all those things that make it so challenging for the future.
So yeah, maybe, I don't know if you still want to talk about your slide.
I can talk about this, and this will be a good way to explain our paper and the assumption in our paper. So this morning, Bob was talking about how he didn't believe in carbon utilization, but he didn't provide any numbers behind that. And so what I'm going to give you, absolutely, and well, not necessarily. What I'm going to do is I'm going to present the facts, right? And then you decide. So in this graph, you'll notice it says steam cracking at the top. And then in parentheses, you have the reaction when you're starting from ethane. So ethane gives you ethylene and it gives you hydrogen. And the enthalpy change for that transformation is 1,400 kilowatt hours for every ton of ethylene that you want to make. And I chose those units because we can all relate to them. I know that, for example, I'm paying 20 cents for every kilowatt hour I consume at home. So if I were to put a steam cracker in my garage, I would be paying $28 for the energy that's consumed by that steam cracker, right?
This is, by the way, completely normal talk for chemists. We get together on Sunday afternoons and open our garages and show them our steam crackers,
Exactly.
our naphtha reformers.
Okay, so that is steam cracking. So 1,400 kilowatt hours per ton of ethylene you want to produce when you start from ethane. And this quantity, delta H, the enthalpy change of the reaction, doesn't change much with temperature. So even though the number I'm quoting here is for the typical operating temperature of a steam cracker, in excess of 800 degrees centigrade, you do the same calculation at room temperature, and you're gonna get very similar number as the one that I got. How do you get that number? If you look at the table on the bottom right corner, you'll see a list of species and their enthalpies and their Gibbs energies. So you can pick the number for ethylene, you pick the number for ethane, you pick 0 for hydrogen because it's an element, and you get the value for delta H that I'm quoting at the top of the chart, right? And these numbers, by the way, you can, I mean, for those of you who are not chemists or engineers, you can actually get this from Wikipedia. So what I'm showing you here is not some far-reaching research that's coming out of Dow's labs. This is a graph that anyone can generate. Now, the other reaction that I'm showing at the top of the table is what academia is concentrating on right now. So there are lots of people in academia that are doing carbon dioxide electroreduction. And I'm not showing the anodic and the cathodic reactions here. I'm just showing the overall reaction. It says 2 moles of CO2, 2 moles of water gives you 1 of ethylene and 3 of oxygen. If you do the same calculations that I did for steam cracking, for that particular reaction, you calculate the delta H and the delta G. The first number is going to be 14,000, and that's not a typo. So 14,000 kilowatt hours per ton of ethylene you want to produce through this route. So we're talking about 10 times as much energy for this reaction as the traditional steam cracking reaction when you start from ethane. And then the other number, delta G, is important for electrochemists because that gives you an idea of the minimum amount of electricity that you're going to have to put in your electrochemical cell in order to accomplish this transformation. But that's just the minimum. So the entire graph is built around the idea that in every electrochemical cell you have a certain energy efficiency. So that's what the horizontal axis is showing you. And then on the vertical axis you see energies. So if you check the literature on carbon dioxide electroreduction, you'll see every once in a while a paper comes out with some new metrics, some improvements in selectivities, in Faraday efficiencies, in current densities, in energy efficiencies. And what you'll notice also is that paper will also come with a press release. And in the press release, they normally say, we're developing a technology for the production of ethylene, which until now has been produced using steam cracking. And steam cracking plants consume enormous amounts of energy. But they don't say anything about the consumption of energy in the route they're exploring. And that's the number that I'm showing you here. So this transformation, the transformation from carbon dioxide in water to ethylene actually consumes 10 times as much energy approximately as steam cracking. Now the horizontal axis, which is energy efficiency, if you can do this at 100% energy efficiency, which of course is impossible, you have to run your cell at an infinitesimal current density to get close to that number. So normally you'll run at high enough current densities for your capital cost to be as low as possible. So you'll probably have energy efficiencies much lower than 100%. I mean, the best number I've seen quoted in the literature is 50%, which means that in that case, if you only have 50% energy efficiency, now you're consuming approximately 20 times as much energy as in the steam cracking process. And this pretty much is another way to look at that paper that we presented a few months ago, and which is that if you're going to use carbon dioxide in water as your starting point, it isn't so much, and I want to highlight one thing, this is not a weakness of electrochemistry. So that's just the way things are because you want to start from carbon dioxide and water. You probably remember from your thermodynamics class that certain quantities in thermodynamics are path dependent, and some of them are path independent. So the path dependent quantities are the two curves that I'm showing you. W is for the amount of electricity you're going to use, And Q is for the heat you're going to have to remove from your electrolyzer as you accomplish this transformation. So depending on the energy efficiency, in other words, depending on your path, you'll consume more or less electricity. The quantities that are path independent are delta H and delta G. So those are the ones that appear on the far right at 100% energy efficiency. And I bring up the subject of path independence because I'm showing you here how you do this with electrochemistry, but you can pick any other route that starts at carbon dioxide and water and takes you to ethylene, and it's going to be the same story. A good example is, for instance, go to syngas first, and then from syngas, go to olefins. So the amount of electricity that you're going to use, the amount of energy that you're going to use in going first to syngas is going to be 14,000 plus all the energy that you're going to release later on when you go from syngas to olefins, which is approximately 1,000 kilowatt hours per ton of ethylene. So again, it's not a weakness of electrochemistry that this would take so much energy. It's just the way nature works. So whichever path you choose, it's always going to be the same.
And I guess the economic implication of that is that when you are picking pathways or starting molecules that require so much more energy, then the cost of energy is not going to be the 6-7 cents a kilowatt hour that you have gotten used to on the US Gulf Coast, but it's going to rise, especially if supply struggles to kind of keep up with it.
If we are all going after renewable electricity in a big way, and we're going to produce ethylene this way, the price of electricity is not going to come down, it's going to go up. And a lot of people are assuming that electricity or energy will be free in the future.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to bet that that's not going to be the case.